Okay, one of the questions that we always get, or comments, or complaints, or compliments, is wow, these flies are so expensive. And yes, it may seem expensive to have to pay $3 for a little beadhead nymph, but there is a reason that they cost that much. Also, one of the common questions we get when people come into our shop is, do you guys tie all these flies yourselves? No, we don't. Now, let's break it down, and we're going to talk about why flies cost what they cost. We're going to also talk about the differences between, let's say, American tied custom flies as well as manufactured flies, most, like 99% of which, come from overseas. And there is a very important reason why the fly manufacturers go overseas, and it's not what you think. We'll talk about that towards the end of the video. But first, let's get into a couple of different scenarios to understand how these flies cost. So first off, we're going to talk about two different scenarios. One is the aspect of the economics of custom tied flies, specifically a fly tyer that we've worked with, Brighton Cleaver, Bulletproof Bugs, I believe is his Instagram handle if you want to check it out. A while back, I saw an advertisement on his Instagram or Facebook or some such advertising $1 midges. Now I look at that, and from our shop standpoint, we have a lot of midges here, hundreds and thousands of them, I would say. Not hundreds of, but thousands and thousands of midge patterns. And I thought, as I look at some of the prices that I pay, $1 was actually kind of a bargain for me on some of these. So I texted old Brighton and I said, hey, can I get in on this deal? And I said, I would like 1,000 of your dollar midge flies because I can sell them for a little bit more and still cover my costs. He hopefully could cover his costs. And then I got to thinking, well, this would be a great example of a scenario where a custom tyer is going to tie for a retail fly shop, which is not often the case. A lot of times the custom tyers may tie one-off type people. Anyway, so Brighton was kind enough to tie these flies for us, number one, at that price, and delivered more than 1,000 flies. And they were extremely good quality. And after he tied them and delivered, we actually put them into a little collection in a little custom fly fish food fly box, and we sell them here in the shop and online. Now, that's not the point of this thing. The point is, let's dive into the economics of what these flies cost Brighton, how much money he made, and then also look at what we tend to gain from that. And then on the other side, the flip side of the coin, let's look at what it might cost for a manufacturer to tie similar sized and similar style midge flies and why the price differential. Now, as we did this little experiment, I was honestly a little surprised that the prices came out a little bit closer, the custom tyer and the manufactured flies. And when I say manufactured flies, these are not machines. They are flies that are tied by hand, typically always by expert fly tyers, typically overseas. So we're going to talk about, in these two scenarios, custom flies as well as manufactured flies, what the costs are, what the prices are, and then breaking those down to understand each of them independently. Okay, for both of our scenarios, we're going to cost the materials, and the cost of the materials are going to vary, but we're just going to cost them at around 20 cents per fly. Based on my research and what we've seen and talked to various custom tyers as well as manufacturers, the hooks, most of the custom tyers are getting the hooks for about the same amount that a manufacturer would. Maybe a little more, but it's not a significant difference. The other cost incurred there, if you're talking with nymphs, would be the beads. So the beads and the hooks are going to be the most expensive. If you're talking dry flies, let's say, hackle is going to be one that might be a little bit more expensive, but we're just going to standardize the material costs so that they're 20 cents per fly, because it really is going to depend on the fly. It's going to depend on the types of materials and all that. So, but as you will see, the cost of the materials there is not the biggest portion of the cost structure. So with the custom flies, and this is information that we got back from Brighton, as well as I did talk to a lot of other custom tyers, both here in the shop as well as other people, and we got these numbers, I think, pretty good. So what are some other costs that are going to come up? Well, you're going to have cost of doing business as a custom fly tyer. You're going to have your tying area. You might have internet, you might have other utilities that you're going to have to pay for depending on how you break that down, but you do have to have some costs assigned there. And one other cost that you probably aren't aware of is an excise cost, excise tax. Now, that's a cost that both the manufacturers and the custom tires should pay. Not all custom tires pay that, but that's around 10%. So that's a significant chunk of your revenue that you're going to have to give to the government. Everybody's under that same rule. So if we put material costs as well as all those other costs, and there could be some advertising, some things like that, we're going to break down, if we're tying, in this instance with midges, about 50 flies per hour, or in the case of these midges, 300 flies per day. Now, if he's selling them to us for $1, that's $300 a day that he can make. And now we're also considering that these are midges. They're extremely easy to tie. They don't require a whole lot of contortion and doing, like if you're doing hackle or different things that are more difficult. So $300 a day. Now, if we put the costs in there, that's going to be about $70 a day. So if we subtract the two, we're going to net $230 a day. So now, before you start jumping for joy, let's look at what that actually breaks down per hour. So if we're looking at the net for these 300 midges, you're making $230 a day. That's going to be roughly $25 an hour, because nobody's going to sit there and tie flies for 10 hours a day necessarily all day, every day. So we have to be a little bit reasonable. I ran these numbers against some other people that tie as far as the number of flies they tie per day, number of hours they tie per day, and that's kind of a reasonable estimate. Okay, so if we look at that $25 an hour, now that is what he's clearing. Now, if you're a custom tire and you can get that number, that's pretty good relative to what you may be worth. If you're used to working for $15 an hour, that's great. If you're used to working for $50 an hour, or you could command that price, that's not so great. So $25 an hour for midges. Now, we would complicate it if we started to do something like, let's say, a Moorish hopper. Now, breaking down a Moorish hopper cost structure, let's assume 6 flies per hour, and that could be pushing it for some people. 36 flies per day, and we're going to sell those for around $3 a fly. We want to make them about the same cost as the retail that you would get if you bought them out of a fly bin. Now, if we do the same cost structure, we're at $108 minus the cost. That gives us $80 for 8 hours. That's $10 an hour. So if you're a custom tire and you're doing Moorish hoppers, bad news is you're probably not going to make that much money, especially if you compare that to the opportunity cost of your hourly rate. So that's a huge thing. Now, we're going to get to some other reasons here in a minute, but now let's look at the manufacturer's costs. Okay, now we are in our warehouse area where we store the flies that we sell. All of the flies in this area are from manufacturers like Umpqua, Mill, Solitude, MFC, and that sort of thing. So we buy them in very high bulk quantities, and we pay what we pay. So if we break down their costs, one thing that a lot of people are going to scream about is, oh no, you're not paying those people a living wage. Well, the way it works from the cost structure, let's again assume the materials are about the same cost. The manufacturer's probably got a bit of an advantage there, but guess what? They have to hire way more fly tyers to keep up with the demand that they have. So while the hourly cost that they're paying is going to be lower, meaning old Brighton up there in Idaho is tying flies, he's a one-man band, and so he can control his cost structure very well. He can choose which flies he does. But if we're going to a bigger, more scaled up system where we have to have a lot more fly tyers, it does make sense to do that overseas so that we can manage our costs. Now, along with that, and this is where I think people lose the vision, is that there is a much more sophisticated structure going on behind the scenes than just 10 people in a room in Kenya tying flies. It's extremely more complex. So as a company that has scaled up fly production, you've got marketing, you've got sales, you've got back-end people, you've got management, you've got a bunch of different components that are going to come into the cost structure. So at a high level, we really can't, me at least, I'm not privy to all that data. I can't break out the costs individually because there's going to be so much cost. But what we can assume is that their net margin, in other words, what they make minus all their costs or their profit, is going to be something that keeps them in business. And that range could be anywhere from 20 to 40% net margin. Okay. I can guarantee you that the fly manufacturers are not, they're not selling flies to me as a retailer for much more of a markup. Okay. Because if they did, it would be that much more expensive. In fact, if you look at the net margin, that's subtracting everything away, you'll probably see their net margin percentages to be much lower than, say, a custom tyer. So now let's assume that it could be anywhere from 20 to 40%. I'm thinking more like 20%, maybe even 10, but they've got a lot of other things that they sell. Most of the fly manufacturers sell other things, so it's not just fly related. So at a high level, if we're going to talk midges, I can buy a midge. They're going to sell a midge to me for, let's say, just to make it simple, $1 each. So I could buy a dozen for 12. Now that's not going to be the case with all midges, but I would then sell it on my end to my customers for something marked up that is, again, similarly going to account for all of my costs, so that when I net this out, I have to be profitable. Because if I'm not profitable, I'm not going to do this, and I'll go find something else to do. So here's how the economics work when it comes down to those flies down in the bins. At a high level, let's just say I buy a fly for $1. And I typically don't mark that up more than 40%, maybe 50% if we're lucky. So let's just go on the extreme. I'm really squeezing the juice out of this lemon. 50% markup on $1 fly is going to be a price of $1.50, right? You got $1.50. I net 50 cents on it. That's 50%. Now, what happens to those 50 cents? Am I ripping you guys off? So let's say I got a $3 fly in the bin. That fly costs me $1.50, or probably a little more like $1.60 or $1.70. And so I'm making only a 40 to 50% margin. So does that mean I pocket that money? Heck no. There are some other costs involved. Let's look at what it takes for us to remain in business. Okay, so here's all the greedy dollars that I took from that profit of those flies that I sold you. But let's see what else is gonna happen to these bucket of dollars we have here. This here is Cade. When we receive our flies in, somebody has to receive them and make sure the numbers are right, that they're entered, they have got pretty photos. And Cade, do you work for free?
No.
Okay. Yoink. Now, once those flies are received, we have to have somebody that knows what they're doing to organize and put them away. Haley, do you work for free?
Nope.
Okay, now when you order your flies, how are those flies going to get to you? We've got Steve over here that's going to pick some flies. Steve, do you work for free?
No.
Yoink. And then Todd over here, he helps keep everything running smoothly, and he's a good warehouse guy. Todd, do you work for free?
Nope. Doink.
Uh-oh. Do you need heat and light? Nope. Yep. Oh, that actually would take a lot more than that. All right, now sometimes we have customers come into our shop and they ask for help with flies and fly tying materials. Lance, do you work for free?
No, give me some of that.
Don't. Okay, finally, after all these costs are consumed, I at least have a few dollar bills left to pay my bills. Oops. Spencer needs to get paid too. So at the end of this, I am left with something, but it's not as much as people may think. Hey, time out. I didn't mention this the first time around. Is something that I totally missed that is very important for you to understand. We're not at all saying that custom fly tyers can't make it, especially if you're tying more complex flies. But the big caveat to that, or I should say, and the big caveat, is that if you are going to do it that way, you need to bump your prices. Don't be afraid to get paid what you're worth. And so that's the other part of the equation. You're not going to find out on the manufactured side, but on the custom side, that is how you make your pay or make your hay. And that is with those prices. I hate seeing dollar a fly prices for a custom tyer because you are not getting paid what you're worth typically. Depends on the fly. But anyway, be mindful of those. And that's how you control. You can control the price as much as you want. You cannot very well control the costs unless you're talking labor, which is part of what the rest of the video talks about. Anyway, time back in, enjoy the rest of the video. Okay, so when all is said and done, what we're really left with is we got to pay for all this stuff too. We got to pay for our studio, the people to edit our videos. So all these fun videos that you see, we do have to pay for those as well. So at the end of the day, our net margin, as opposed to the gross margin that you would see on the price of flies, is substantial, as it would be with the manufacturers. So that's kind of the nature of a supply chain. Now, that's not to say that custom tires are unneeded. We do actually have a number of custom tires that tie for us. Those would be specialty patterns or seasonal things that maybe aren't done from manufacturers. There is one reason, and this is the main reason, that I think a manufacturer is needed in our industry, and that is basically scalability. If you are a fly shop and you want to sell flies, and you will only sell flies based on custom tires, well, number one custom tire would not cut it. And number two, even if you did with one custom tire, there is a high likelihood that whether they're sick or they get behind, you would probably have a delivery impact at some point. And not only that, rather than 30 colors of woolly buggers, they only may want to provide you with 3 or 4. So because we want, as anglers, we want our flies now, and we want as many as we can, because we know that next time we go, that green color of this Who's-a-What's-it midge is going to kill them. Then that's why we need manufacturers, because they scale and they run a business such that it can support the demand that we put on the flies. And so in order to do that, they have a much more sophisticated business structure. So at the end of the day, scalability is the biggest thing why there are not more American tide flies. Now, I'm not saying that that's good or bad. I'm just saying that it is necessary given what we as anglers need and what we want to do to enjoy the sport that we so much enjoy. Now, if you do want to check out Bright and Cleaver, Bulletproof Bugs on Instagram, check out our website. We have close to 4,500 different items of flies that we sell. And we do that because we like to keep people happy with the flies that they tie. And again, we buy those from various manufacturers around the world. And at the end of the day, I think everybody's in this for fishing. It's all about having fun. So go out there, have fun. If you can't afford a $3 fly, there's probably other options to buy cheaper flies. And if you like the custom tire, I would suggest that you go and list those services of custom tire, because they can be really good. At the end of the day, this is all about having fun and fishing. So get out there and do it. Check us out at flyfishfood.com. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below. We'll be happy to respond.